Welcome everybody, it's wonderful to see you here this evening. Thanks very much for coming along. My name is David Tomas. I'm a Howard Patterson Professor of Theology and Public Issues here at the University of Otago. It's a great pleasure to be holding this event this week during Holy Week 2017. It's a very somber subject that we're going to be looking at together, but I'm delighted that we have the opportunity to spend this time with Dr. Rocio Figueroa Alvear, who will be talking to us about a project that Rocio and I did in 2016, listening to male survivors of church sexual abuse, the Sodalicio case in Peru. Rocio is very familiar with this case. She is herself from Peru. She grew up there, did undergraduate and postgraduate work in theology there, and was leader of the community, the Marian Community of Reconciliation. And that was the female equivalent of the Sodalicio order, the Sodalicio Society, that we're going to be hearing more about this evening. From Peru, Rocio went on to do postgraduate and doctoral work in Rome at the Gregorian University, and she was also in charge of the women's section of the Pontifical Commission on Laity. So she has huge experience, both theologically and pastorally, practically and theoretically in this area. It was our very good luck that for various personal reasons she came to New Zealand and heard about the work of the Centre in 2015, and we developed a collaboration together with the generous support of the University of Otago research grant to take further work that she had been doing in relation to Sodalicio by interviewing some of the victims of the abuse cases there, and was able to do that, to transcribe the interviews, to write it up in a very substantial report, which is available through the Centre website if you do want to learn more about what you hear this evening. After doing it first in English, we then translated it into Spanish, and the Spanish version in particular has had a very, very lively reaction in Peru. It's been the subject of a certain amount of media coverage, and it's had quite a lot of public square discussion. So, without me saying more, please welcome Rocio to speak to us this evening.
Thank you very much, David Tomas, for the invitation. Thank you, all of you, for being here to listen. A topic that is not easy to listen, and it's a little bit hard. It has been very hard for me to do this research, but I felt compelled to do it, like a moral duty, because I think that we have to do something about this issue. I am a Catholic, I have grown up as a Catholic, and I think that we have failed in how to respond to the crisis. So clergy perpetrated sexual abuse has occurred throughout all the world, but for the Catholic Church, it has been, I think, one of the biggest crises of the history. 3 cases have received particular attention in Latin America. Some of them, perhaps you know of them. Legionaries of Christ, with the founder, Maciel. The Caradima group in Chile, there's another group, Maciel is in Mexico. The Caradima group in Chile, and Figari, Luis Fernando Figari, from the Sodalicio in Peru. These 3 communities, there are huge Catholic movements in Latin America, but they have spread all over the world. And these 3 communities are part of the birth and growth of movements after Second Vatican Council. Each of these 3 movements was initially heralded for its success and growth, and at the same time, paradoxically, because they were well known also for being very loyal to the magisterium, very loyal to the Vatican, but paradoxically also, each movement, the 3 founders, has subsequently been accused of serious sexual abuse. While all the members of Legionaries of Christ and Caradima group, who comes from Chile, the founder is not in the slide, all of them are priests. In the case of Sodalicio, the majority are lay people, and just they have some priests. I have a particular knowledge of the case of Sodalicio because, as David mentioned, I was very close because I belong to the feminine branch. And the Sodalicio was founded by a layman called Luis Fernando Figari in 1971. All the lay members of the community, they were lay consecrated, they lived in communities, and they followed the promises of obedience, celibacy, and poverty as a congregation of the Catholic Church. They had presence in schools, universities, youth communities, pastoral centers. They have a strong presence in Latin America, the three movements, very strong presence in Latin America and also in Italy. I was previously a member of the Marian Community of Reconciliation, that was a feminine branch, and I was a superior for 9 years, from 1991 to from 8 years, 1998. And what happened, then I went to Rome to do my doctorate, and when I was in Rome, a victim, an abuse victim, contacted me in 2006. I was, of course, we didn't know anything about all that was happening in the masculine community. Everything, I was 20 years of my life there, and a victim came to contact me. Since then, I began talking with many other victims. I decided to begin an investigation because the first victim who came to talk to me told me that this guy, Germán Doig, that it was the number 2nd of the institution, like the vicar of the institution, and was already dead. And the victim came to tell me, this leader abused when I was a young boy. And this person, if you can see, that's a little prayer, because his cause of beatification was in Rome, was in the diocese. He was in the process of being a saint. And I was the founder, who is the other one, Figari, told me, Rocio, as you are in Rome, you can do the study, and I did a study in Rome for how to, in Rome we call the cause of postulation, the cause for, and why don't you write a biography of this person that have died and that we are already he was moving for the altar. So in that moment, I had already, the victim has already come to me to talk to me, and I began the investigation. So I said to myself, I have to investigate. Of course, when I said I cannot write that biography because this guy is not a saint, he has been an abuser, because I went to the founder to denounce this. He denied everything, and he said that I was doing a complot, that I was mad, out of my mind, that it could not be possible, and that they needed a saint, and that will be. So I decided, okay, I will continue the investigation. I will not stop. And the story began there. More victims reported being abused, not only by the second in command, but also by the founder. And that's why the founder didn't accept anything, because he was also an abuser. But not only, there were other 3 leaders, and that's the incredible thing. They were not just common members of the communities, of the movements. There were people with position of power and the leaders of the communities. So I helped the victims to present the accusations against the founder to the court, ecclesiastical court in Lima. And as I was in Rome, I also helped the victims to present the accusation to the Vatican. This was in 2011. It took me 5 years, from 2006 to 2011, investigate who were the perpetrators, and discovered that also the founder was a perpetrator. During this time, I developed a relationship of trust with the victims. And this was a crucial factor in making this research. In October 2015, Pedro Salinas, who was a former member of the institution, and he is a journalist, he decided to publish a book because, and of course, we worked together. And he published a book that it was the only way in which the scandal exploded. You know, I began the investigation in 2006. I presented the accusations in 2011. And till 2015, the victims didn't receive any response from the ecclesiastical court. They didn't receive any response from the Vatican, but when the book was published, the book had 30 testimonies of victims of sexual abuse within the Sodalicium. The book is called Half Soldiers, Half Monks, What Sodalicio Does Not Want You to Know. So the book gathers all these testimonies. Of these testimonies, 5 narrates episodes of sexual abuse. In response to the book, then Sodalicio, of course, it was a big scandal in the society in Lima because they have a strong presence in the society. Sodalicio announced that the Vatican was investigating the founder and admitted, finally, that sexual allegations were plausibly. And they apologized to victims, acknowledging that they had received no satisfactory reply. At this point, Sodalicio hired experts, hired a psychiatrist, a lawyer, a bishop. Don't hire, they formed a commission to do more investigations. Like 200 people came to talk to them, and they published a report that was very, very strong. The report of the commission said that there were physical abuses, psychological abuses, sexual abuses, and of course, when we talk about sexual abuse, we are talking about abuse of power. And that was one of the characteristics of the superior, and in particularly with the male branch, because he was not interested in the feminine branch, thank God. So, Sodalicio now have recognized 66 victims, 66, and has set aside a fund of nearly 4 million New Zealand dollars for reparations. Because the abuse was perpetrated over 25 years ago, the statute of limitations makes it impossible for Figari, according to the laws in Peru, to be prosecuted by civil authorities. So now he lives in Rome. The Vatican's investigation concluded in January of 2017. It's just concluded now in January. And they sent just a letter that was published in all the media from the Congregation of Institutes of Consecrated Life, saying that asking Figari to live a life of penance and prayer, but with no contact with the community. But as Figari has declared that he's innocent and he has appealed to the Vatican, now everything is on standby. He continues living in a community and nothing has happened. Let's talk about a little bit the sexual abuse, because our research, we try to understand a little bit more about the spiritual impacts that the sexual abuse has on victims, The Center for Theology in 2016 at the University of Otago published a report here with interviews with 8 survivors from the Sodalicio case. The interviewers now are all now middle-aged, but had been involved with Sodalicio when they were very young. In our study, we interviewed 8 victims of sexual abuse. The sexual abuse took place when they were minors or young adults. Now their ages range from 35 to 55 years old. The spiritual impacts of sexual abuse are a largely neglected topic. We always are a little bit surprised by the scandal or by the horrible thing about the sexual abuse in se. Itself is just horrible. And we talk a lot about also the psychological consequences, but we don't talk too much about the spiritual consequences, that in the case of people that have been abused by people that represent God or have a pastoral mission, it has incredible impacts in their spiritual life. Our lesson from this report is that the spiritual impact of abuse should be included in any full understanding of impact and consequences. This appreciation is particularly relevant in instances of church sexual abuse, of course. there is a difference when we talk about sexual abuse in the case of clergy-perpetrated sexual abuse. It has a different characteristic from other sexual abuses. We can read a definition from Farrell and Taylor. It involves the physical and psychological betrayal of a child by any person in a position of power and trust who is formally authorized to perform the rites of an organized religion. The abuse involves the traumatic sexualization of the child via the use of force or the threat of force or even coercion for the self-gratification of the perpetrating cleric. Implicit within the abuse is the child's inability to give informed consent due to the inequality that exists within this relationship. The perpetrator propels the child to keep the secret and to remain silent. The long-term implications for the abuse is a legacy of erosion and stigmatization of the child's well-being, creating theological and existential conflict, while challenging the victim's religious faith, spiritual identity, and any concept that they have for God. So, an important feature of clergy-perpetrated sexual abuse is that many survivors begin to view the institution as a desecrated place. McLaughlin demonstrates with data that the victims see priests as connected to the church, and they have been hurt by the priests, they have been abused by the priests, the ones who represent God, so they don't want to do anything with the church. They have no trust anymore, not only with the perpetrator, but also towards the priesthood in general and towards the wider church in general. The reaction of the wider community also can affect the victims. For example, in the case of Sodalicio in Peru, the fact that they didn't believe them, that they say that they were inventing everything, you know, it's like a re-victimization of the victim. And they become like the space goat. They are the wrong ones. They are the mean, not the perpetrator. It was just incredible, the reaction of the community in Peru, not the society. The society reacted with a lot of solidarity. And also you can see that, and you will see with the interviews that we have done, the sexual abuse damages the survivor's faith in God. The first impact is that they question God's benevolence. Some victims not only have a crisis of faith, but even question the existence of God. And they also experience a loss of spirituality. And of course, they have struggles with the divine. They have struggles with also their personal identity. If they were first Catholics or Christians, so who am I now that I have lost something so important for my person? So, and other consequence is a sense of betrayal that we will see in death afterwards. The clergy sexual abuse is a trauma that denudes the soul of the basic trust that all of us we need for having any spiritual experience, just for having relationships. We need to trust people. And if a child or a young adult have suffered sexual abuse, they lose this trust. I will show you some of the interviews of the victims. And first of all, we will see a little bit about this feeling of betrayal and lack of trust. For example, we can see Santiago. Santiago describes his experience of sexual abuse. When Figari is the perpetrator, tried to sodomize Santiago, he had difficulties with the penetration. In that moment, with the coolness of a surgeon, he went to his night table, opened the drawer, and took a Vaseline jar to continue the ritual. The most strange thing is that when he was penetrating, he asked me to masturbate. And the weirdest thing, after that, he asked me to go to Mass. It was not the only time that it happened. It was always in the same room. I remember the night table, the lights, how the bedroom was organized, the pictures. I remember his mother walking there. So I afterwards asked for his feelings after the abuse, and he explained, consciousness came little by little. I felt like a storm. Everything was moving around me. I was isolated. I realized that I have been cheated. Sexual abuse destroys the most inner part of yourself. If someone rapes you, it is totally different. I think that the worst case is the worst thing that they can happen to us. I think I am at my most traumatic central point. I don't trust people. So it's very interesting because he says here what is the biggest damage that he feels. And he doesn't talk about psychological consequences, or he doesn't talk about, the sexual abuse itself, but he talks about the trust. So Santiago, and you have to understand also that Figari cheated them because he said that there were like tests for gaining the control of their bodies. So if they want to be celibate, they have to be, okay, now you get nude. Now I will touch you, but you don't have to feel anything because you have to live the purity. So they were cheated because they trusted in him. And he was the spiritual director. So they obeyed him because they trusted that it was a good thing, a spiritual exercises. But these they were very young. Some of them, they were 14, 13. Santiago was 16. But they were naive and innocent boys. And so they obeyed because they trust. So Santiago trusted him. He states with certainty that the sexual abuse is totally different from a rape because it destroys the most inner part of yourself. What is this inner part? The core is the possibility to trust. It's like the base for the spiritual development of any person. Then we see Tomas. Tomas says during the sessions of spiritual direction, Germán is the other one, the abuser, asked him to remove my clothes for yoga and perform exercises of yoga in which we transmitted energy one to another. Once he asked me to stay absolutely naked, he hugged me and he began kissing me and he said, don't worry, I love you in Christ as a friend. This is absolutely natural. This continued for 3 months. In another occasion, he asked me to penetrate him. Other times, he asked me to masturbate myself till he ejaculated and he said, it is not a sin. I am your superior and you have to trust in me. This is a spiritual path. It is just for some who are elected. It is not for all. Germán Doig ended the relationship before I went to San Bartolo. It's the center of formation. He never gave me any explanation. I had loss after loss. Germán Doig was a loss for me. He split with me without explanation, as when you have a boyfriend with someone that you are in love, but I blocked everything. I had a sense of loss. Now I feel sorry, sadness. I think that it is so painful to think that the people you trusted betrayed you and that is why I cannot feel anything against him. So Tomas feels sadness and a sense of loss. Doig was his friend, was his spiritual director, was his father. So he felt he is not able to feel he has blocked all his feelings. For example, he told me last time, 2 months ago, I am not able to recognize myself as a victim. And he has now, after 30 years of this event, he continues with a strong depression. He cannot go outside his bedroom. He cannot work. He has divorced from his wife. He has no life anymore. And he says, I am so damaged that I cannot even recognize that I am a victim. Because just the thought, at least if I think that I am not a victim, I have some control. But the thought that he betrayed my trust, it is that hurts me. So we see this betrayal of trust as one of the consequences, but we see another that is a damage to the faith. In the interview, we gave them a questionnaire, but it was a personal interview by Skype and sometimes also in person. We asked, did the abuse have any impact on your religious faith and your sense of God? Tomas answered, catastrophic. When I understood that I was cheated, I lost my faith. Now I have left God on standby. It is too much for me to handle. At the beginning, I abandoned the faith. Now, when I pass near a church and I see the Blessed Sacrament, I feel God. He has not left me, but now my relationship with God is on an orange light, on standby. It gives me too much pain and sadness to feel that he abandoned me, and just to ponder the possibility that he failed me is unbearable. Tomas is the one who I told you that now has a strong depression and he cannot go out from his house and he cannot work. And when he told me about his experience, when he was a child, he was a very spiritual child. He said, as a child, I had two drivers on my faith, my home and my parish life. I had a very intense experience of God. I felt God very close to me. I felt like I was protected. And he was a leader. He was the first of his class. He was a very intelligent boy. And the perpetrator abused him when he was 12 years old, when his father was on the hospital dying. So he took the vulnerable little child that he was very spiritual boy, and then now his life has been damaged forever. So then we see Jose Enrique, for example, Jose Enrique affirms, they have snatched our faith with a clerical penis. They have robbed my life, my life's project, my essence, and that is the greatest violence that can exist. The image used by Jose Enrique is very strong, clerical penis, and you see that the relationship, the metaphor that he uses. So the word clerical is associated here with an act of violence that robbed Jose's project of life, Jose's faith. So he considered that the most damaging violence was not the sexual abuse itself, but his life's project. He wanted to be a good person. He wanted to follow Jesus. He wanted to have do good things in his life. And he felt that his project of life was damaged. He lost it. Xavier, also he was abused, but another of the leaders that is not in the pictures that I have shown you. Xavier states, yes, when we ask about his religious faith, yes, I am not religious because of the abuse. And not only because of the abuse, but also because of the cover-up and the corruption of the church. It has had a huge impact in my religious life. If God exists, why did he send this trial to a little kid? What kind of psychopath is God that would put a child in a sexual trial at 14 years old with a person that doubled his age? It does not make any sense. It has no sense. Yes, the abuse has had an impact on my religiousness or on my lack of religiousness. The sexual abuse in the case of Xavier also here is very interesting because he shows fundamental theological problems. How can a good God allow such terrible evil and suffering in his name? It doesn't make sense, says Xavier. Xavier has been abused by a representative of God, and he makes the association, and that's what I was telling you, he makes the association between God and the perpetrator. What kind of psychopath is God? As if God was the one who abused him, because he makes the association between God and the perpetrator. Because, of course, the perpetrator was a representative of God. This generated, he also expresses profound anger against the people who protect the perpetrators. He feels anger against the church that continues covering up. And this generated a deep disbelief in the church and a general mistrust of religious institutions in general. None of the other participants felt a personal relationship with God before or during their time at Sodalicio, and that's interesting because you can see that they were attracted more by the charismatic leader. They were attracted by the other type of motivations, you know, the life in community, the friendship, but not because of the personal relationship with God. And here is when we can see when we don't find healthy communities, and you know, when the attraction is more other type of motivations. So, for example, one of them, Juan, affirms, the only reason I accepted the faith was because of the moral authority who told me that it was true. So it was not a personal conviction, but it was more a fact that he was following the leader. That was an intellectual reason. I never had a religious experience. Jose, another, stated, I didn't have a particular interest in religion. It was rather for the intellectual side. It was more an intellectual path than a practical commitment. But of course, the community had a very strong intellectual interest in general, so they studied a lot. So he shows, for example, that his interest was not a religious interest, but it was more an intellectual interest. Their motives for continuing in Sodalicio were the strong sense of community that they found and the charisma of the leaders. They didn't mention any real religious motivations. In analyzing the religious impact of sexual abuse, we have to understand that Sodalicio didn't offer any real spiritual experience of God for the participants of this research. It was more about loyalty to the institution and the overall ideological principles of Sodalicio. Those initiates who were not religious before joining Sodalicio did not report feelings of abandonment by God. And the ones in the interviews who considered that they were religious, it was because they were religious before, when they had families that were religious, or they have a spiritual life before the life in the institution. So the damage caused by institutional sexual abuse is often traumatic and profound. This is frequently heightened. I think that is worse when the perpetrators have a religious standing and authority. Even though Figari and other consecrated leaders were not technically clergy, they shared a similar institutional role as pastors, no? As spiritual directors, as guides. So, despite the clear need for a deeper understanding of the impact of sexual abuse on religious faith, relatively little work has been done in this area so far, especially in relation to men and boys. Inquiries of this sort are challenging to undertake, but are vital for a better understanding of the destructive consequences and long-term legacies of these abuses. Recognition of different spiritual consequences should be included alongside any attention to physical and psychological consequences. Sometimes in the different studies, spiritual consequences are not included. That we are talking only not just the relationship with God, but also a problem of identity. That I think is the core. If you have a spiritual life and you consider that your spiritual life is the core of your person, and if you lose that, you really will have a problem of identity, a serious problem of identity. So we have to understand also that the physical, psychological, and spiritual often happen together and can magnify each other. And we need this study, a holistic study, for a pastoral response, because it's not just about money, it's not just about reparation, it's not just about therapy, psychological. It is all those things are needed, but also we need a pastoral response from the part of the church. So that's why also I felt compelled to do this research, because some of them are my friends. I knew them where we were young kids, and I really care about them, And I really knew about this when they were already 50 years old, and I have accompanied them through all this path, and it has been a hard thing to do, but I think also that that's why I am very happy to do this research, and I want to continue, not only trying to understand the spiritual consequences, but also to try to know how to help them in this process of healing that I think also is very important. But the first thing is to understand what's happening with them. And I think that this research has tried. The fact is that we are not generalizing. It's not, we have just interviewed 8 people, but I think with this research we could go in depth about the concerns of each of the participants about their concerns and problems and hopes and reality. So that's it.